says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a police! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Tip Sheet podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as Forty20. Joining me to break down another week of NRL news and everything surrounding the game itself are my good mates, Sixties and Clint. Fellas, good to have you on board. Craig, it's not been too long since we last had our chat on the Tip Sheet.
No, we had our delayed reaction podcast that we recorded earlier today. It's now Tuesday night. We're recording this for a Wednesday release of the podcast. But yeah, mate, it's we've certainly been very busy over the last few days, and it's going to get even busier with a big week of TCT content leading into the game against the Raiders.
Yeah, 3 games against the Raiders, Clint. Massive Saturday of action. What are you looking forward to, mate?
Well, hopefully a reversal of form from a first grade perspective. There's probably a bitter taste still in the mouth of many Eels fans across the country. So, hopefully we can bring you guys something to smile about leading to this week, and we can turn the tide.
And before we get into it, a quick thank you to the sponsors of the Tip Sheet, Big Swing Golf, Northmead, and star partners Narellan, Auburn, and Parramatta, making the Tip Sheet happen each and every week. Let's hit the stinger, boys.
News team, assemble!
And it's my favourite part of the podcast, 60s, when I get to hand over the reins to you this week and let you run the show. So get into it, big fella.
Yeah, well, it's a big week of Eels news and NRL news. So we'll kick it off with the Eels news. We had the loss in Magic Round that wasn't so magic for the Parramatta Eels with a loss to the Titans. But we've got the fallout from that loss, which first and foremost means being without Mitch Moses for this game against the Raiders, and he only really just snuck into being available for the match the following week. But how do we cope without Mitch Moses this week?
Well, it's when you look back on what he does for the team, it's not just being the halfback, but it's the goal kicker, and there's a lot of leadership stuff he does too in terms of captain's challenges. So the redistribution of responsibilities is significant this week, and in terms of goal kicking, that goes straight to Quinton Gufferson. No surprises there. But you're going to have Jake Arthur come in and try and manage that team management sort of thing with Dylan and himself. And they're going to have to try and balance the load without getting away of Dill's real flourish of form that we saw against the Titans. So you need Jake to steer the team around and get him in the right places, but then let Dill play the hot hand. So it's a complex puzzle, 60s. And when you lose someone like Moses, there are just so many moving pieces that go into that position at halfback, and especially when you're one of the top 2 or 3 halfbacks in the NRL.
Clint, who does the big step up here? Is it the big step up for Jake Arthur, or is it the big step up for Dylan Brown? What's your take on being without Mitch Moses?
To me, the big step up has to be Dylan Brown. He's the senior player. He's an international now as well. Obviously, having represented New Zealand in a couple of tests and across the World Cup at the back end of last year, we saw him play somewhere close to some of his best football against the Titans on the weekend. Jake's just got to come in and do his job. But I think it's important that we're pumping Jake's tires up throughout this week, and we're watching a couple of replays of the game against Manly at Brookvale from 2022. When Jake had arguably his best game in first grade, and Dylan absolutely ran the show from the second half. I think there's a blueprint within that game for those two to operate and work together. All we need from Jake, I guess, is him to come and do his job, and try and replicate Moses in the aggregate in terms of clearing kicks and kicking for field position. If he does that and he makes his tackles, Jake's doing his job. We look to the other leaders of the team to step up and fill the void creatively with the absence of Moses.
Yeah, I guess his return to playing consistent New South Wales Cup football, I'm talking about Jake Arthur, will probably hold him in good stead, because he's had to deal with a New South Wales Cup team around him that's been a bit up and down in form. And to a large degree, he's probably been the most consistent performer in the New South Wales Cup team this season. But going forward into this game, Dylan Brown, his natural game is really to be that runner and the bloke to play a little bit more off the cuff type of football. But as you said, he is the international player. He's the senior player in the team. So we hope that what we probably want to see is a bit more of what we saw of Dylan Brown against the Titans, which if he's playing like that, it takes a lot of pressure off Jake Arthur, doesn't it?
I think in the big picture too, looking to when Moses gets back, I hope there's an instructional moment there for both our spine and the coaching staff from that Titans game, in that we see Mitchell Moses been able to play both sides, left and right, in and out of structure. He's got the license to do that. But Dylan generally ends up either being parked on the left or being a fulcrum, in a big movement from one side of the field to the other, sort of in that middle corridor. I think that with the talents of both Dylan and Mitchell, you want both of them constantly attacking both sides, not every set. You don't have to waste their energy every set, but let them mix it up and get Dill on the right, chiming in with Mitchell Moses and sort of creating different shapes and looks that cause the defense to have to think and slow down. So that's my big takeaway, or hopeful takeaway, out of that Gold Coast loss, is that while Mitchell Moses has been lethal chiming in down the left, let's get Dylan, when everyone's back in there, chiming in down the right.
Yeah. Now, just before we move on from talking about that loss against the Titans, I just want to talk a little bit more about the issue with Jayden Campbell and leading with his knees. We spoke a little bit about this in the delayed reaction podcast, and I've tweeted the photos of Jayden Campbell's action as he's coming in to make the tackles, and we saw how devastating that sliding knees tackle was for Sean Russell last year. He managed just to not make as much contact with his knees going into Mike Acevo, but that technique, surely, I'm still dumbfounded as to why there isn't something, at least in the way of a warning letter or any discussion about it, because it seems to me it's not even been a talking point in the media at all. Am I overreacting to that particular tackle, or is there some justification in being upset that this particular technique just seems to fly under the radar?
We spoke about it, Sixties, and I'm just going to reiterate, no one's going to care. It's not going to be an issue until a quote-unquote important player suffers injuries or consequences of those actions from someone like Campbell. It literally happened last year to poor Sean Russell, and the NRL didn't even bat an eye. They didn't charge Jayden Campbell. It didn't get a mention in Graham Annesley's round one debrief the following Monday. So unfortunately, these are the sort of tendencies, and we saw with Billy Slater for a long time. He had a number of dangerous practices when he was, being the game's best fullback on both sides of the ball, and in this case defensively, where it was allowed to fester and go on for so long until it reached a critical point against, it might have been the Bulldogs. So he had the leg raising against David Clemmer when he was catching high balls, and that was, he sort of tried to kick Clemmer in the face. And then there was obviously the sliding in with the knees too for Billy Slater. So it's the same case here of Jayden Campbell. Until it happens to the Roosters, to South Sydney, to Melbourne, to one of their key players, it's not going to be a talking point in the wider media.
Clint?
Yeah, look, I'm probably going to refer to John as Meatloaf in this instance, because he took the words right out of my mouth. I think back to what happened with Billy Slater all those years ago, and it's the same discussion, just a different technique. And there needs to be more onus and responsibility on players in those situations. We spoke a couple of weeks ago about the duty of care in relation to the hip drop tackle. Well, that duty of care doesn't stop just in different moments of play. It's ongoing. Particularly in a moment like that where Micah in that instance wasn't going to be stopped. Jayden wasn't going to stop him. Mike had already passed the play and gone over the try line. By that point, you would think the player regardless of whether they're committed to something, is at least trying to pull up. I think there needs to be more attention on it, and as John so eloquently put, it's probably not going to get attention until there's a bigger issue made of it, and normally that doesn't happen until a quote unquote bigger club is on the receiving end of it. We got Dylan Brown got a lot of attention for what happened to Drew Hutchinson a couple of years ago. But we've seen instances like that over the years, and certainly not warrant as much attention as that.
And the big thing with that Dylan and Hutchinson incident is that Dylan got the punishment. He got 2 or 3 weeks to sit down, and
exactly
since then he's never led off his knees.
With that either.
Yeah, and
he got vilified in the media too.
Yeah.
So the silence is disturbing, and it's certainly something that creates, I suppose, a little bit of a narrative of haves and have-nots, and a greater discussion around equity when it comes to interpretation of punishment and also reward in the NRL.
Yeah. Now, the other fallout from the loss to the Titans is the most blatant one, which is it's another loss. It's we're falling further behind on the competition ladder. I don't know whether we're at the point where we call this match against the Raiders season defining, but at what point do we start to get some genuine concerns about where Parramatta's heading this season?
It's close 60s because you enter round 11 4-6 on the season, so your win rate is down to 40%, and you're playing the Canberra Raiders who are on a 4-game win streak. Yes, 3 of those wins are on the streakier side of things. They beat the Dolphins by 1 point, they beat the Dogs by 4 points, and then they beat the Dragons by, I think, 6 points. So they're all very close games against, well, in the Dolphins' case, they're a good team this year, but in the other 2 teams' cases, they're not great opposition. But their other win was the lone defeat that Brisbane suffered this year. And they played fantastic football in that contest. So we know that Canberra are a formidable outfit. We know that both their backs and forwards are physically imposing players. And they're going to ask the sort of questions that this team right now is struggling to answer. And the big problem is that you come into this round going to Canberra, which is always a tough road trip, and you're going to come in on the 4-6 record. Next week, it's the South Sydney Rabbitohs, who, regardless of them being the best team this year, are always our biggest bogey team. So if you drop this game now, there's a very real chance you come out of round 12 going 4-8. Is it right? 4-8? 4-8, yeah.
Yeah.
You beat 4-8. So you're four games behind that 500 winning percentage, which is usually sort of the top 8 cutoff roughly. I don't really know what changes this year with the 17th team and whatnot. But having that sort of parity between wins and losses is usually the base metric for being in top 8 contention. And yet you're 4 games below 500 and you have so much work to do. So this game, it's not must win, but it's not far off.
Yeah. Clint?
I think there's a lot of urgency around this game, gents. It's not panic stations necessarily, but it's something that we need to be going in with complete intention. And that's not to suggest that we don't go in with complete intention in every game, but there is a real urgency for the reasons that you've just laid out, John, around our win-loss record, that we need to go into this and be coming away with the 2 points. Because the potential ramifications, if we don't, can be season defining. Our challenges against the Rabbitohs are well documented, and I dare say when everyone gets out the proverbial ladder predictor and looks at where they might bank some wins throughout the season, they probably would have looked at Magic Round against the Titans as a game that we would win, and statistically, when we look at how the game finished. It was a stat line that read like we should have won. We touched on the Tigers a few weeks ago having similar stats but not coming away with the victory. This for me, guys, is it's a game we need to find a way to win.
Yeah. Instead of what we seem to be doing is finding that way to lose.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was going to go from there into looking at the New South Wales Cup, bouncing back now with a couple of consecutive victories after some consecutive poor games. But I think we might tie it in with the team list. So I want to look at these team lists that have been announced today, because we've had some interesting selections that have flowed through. So in the NRL, we've got obviously Jake Arthur's promotion in for Mitch Moses to cover for his concussion protocols absence. But then we were speculating today in our delayed reaction podcast about how Jake's position gets filled in the halves in New South Wales Cup, and we've seen that Jordan Rankin's moved to half, and Jaden Yates has been named at 5'8", and then that's combined with Nick Lanaz being moved up from Jersey Flegg onto the bench in New South Wales Cup, and then of course that's flowed into his spot and some others being available in the Jersey Flegg, and we've had 5 SG Ball promotions into the Jersey Flegg team, so plenty to talk about there. We've really talked about what's happened with Jake, so let's have a bit of a quick take on the New South Wales Cup team. Then, what's your take on Jane Yates coming into the halves and Nick Lanaz coming onto the bench?
Yeah, well, the Yates selection, we all have a real soft spot for Yatesy because he is an absolute terrier in terms of his commitment to fitness and to all the different 1%ers that you love to see from any player, but especially a young one. That's probably the left field selection, though, isn't it, Sixties? I mean, he's going to go out there and hold down an edge defensively and probably defer to Rankin and Dejan Arce in terms of the playmaking stakes. But I wouldn't be surprised if they give him a few different option plays if the team stays in that configuration. Maybe there might be a way of tinkering with the team before kickoff to facilitate a different spine. But as it lines up, you know what you're going to get from Yates. He's going to go out there, he's going to tackle his backside off. He'll let Arce and Rankin steer the team around if he stays in that 5'8" position. And then, maybe he'll also work with his back rower down. Well, the question will be, does Rankin change sides now too, I suppose? I'm not sure. But he'll work with whichever back row he gets assigned with, whether it's Matt Dory or Dan Keir.
Clint, is that how you see it as well, that Arce's likely to be more of a primary playmaker alongside Rankin rather than Yates, or do you think they'll have Yates still assuming some playmaking roles?
No, look, I see it exactly the same way. You know, it's about shoring up the defensive line when you start getting a bit thin in the ranks, and we've seen over many years, many coaches. You know, Brian Smith was certainly a coach when he was head coach of the Eels that liked to pick sides, certainly in the earlier rounds of the competition, based on the best available defensive team. We saw for many years Daniel Wagon being selected at 5'8" for that very reason. So, I kind of look at it as not too dissimilar to that in this instance. And you'd imagine that Dejan and Rankin will be calling the shots.
And what I do like is that Nick Lanaz has been moved up into New South Wales Cup. He's like Jaden Yates. He's one of our favourites in terms of just being a pure effort player. And he's not too dissimilar to Yates in that he plays that lock / dummy half role as well. And even to the extent where when he's playing that lock role, he does completely change how he plays. Like his carries are just like he plays well above his weight. Like he absolutely rips in there. And he's got that spot now. That's interesting because it did open up the spot for Saxon Pryke then to come in and take his lock spot in the Jersey Flegg. But I like it from the perspective that they're giving one of the younger players coming through a shot rather than going to, say, a Wenty Ron Massey Cup team and looking for a player to fill in on the bench.
Yeah, it's something. It's something that we've been critical of is going to the Ron Massey Cup well rather than your own Jersey Flegg and development pathways. I feel like the Ron Massey Cup, and this isn't a knock on those players because some of them come in and done a great job, like Manny Luke, who's been fantastic. Some of them have seized that opportunity, but your priority, or you should have the resources to fill those priority needs with young players. You should always be prioritising the development of young players in these positions. Obviously, we just saw the Eels take out the SG Board Championship, and that was awesome to be part of that as a fan and as a spectator. But each and every one of those grades, right up through Flegg, Cup, all before the NRL, ultimately premierships and winning in those divisions are they're secondary. Like, yeah, you want to win and create positive environments for player development, but you want to be having players on hand always to be developed there. And it's probably somewhere this year where maybe we've tripped up a little bit, but it's good to see Nick getting his dues now after a fantastic start in the Jersey Flegg, and now he gets a chance to impress in proper senior football.
Yeah, Clint?
Yeah, look, it's something that we've touched on across the junior representative season, and it's nice to see this is the pathways in action. This is the point of all of those teams and all of those programs existing, is that when a senior player is missing or unavailable for selection, that the next player next cab off the rank is selected. And we want to be getting these minutes and getting this exposure into as many players as possible, so that when we start talking about succession planning for the first grade squad, we've got players that we can readily call upon, and those levers can be pulled by the club. It's part of what gives the club leverage in salary cap NRL.
Yep. And now let me just run through some names for people. So, looking at the Jersey Flegg side, Richard Penasini on the wing, Ethan Sanders at halfback, Saxon Pryke at lock, Sam Tuivasa on the interchange bench, Lance Fulima as the concussion sub. That's 5 SG Ball graduates. First week that they can join the Jersey Flegg team. They're not just part of the squad training, they've been named. So all of the speculation that we were discussing after the SG Ball won their title, bang, we've got an immediate answer. And I think we also know that Jake Arthur, unfortunately for him, he copped a 2-week suspension for a crusher tackle.
Matty Arthur.
From that. So. Matt Arthur.
We're in trouble if Jake got a 2-week suspension.
So, yes, Matt Arthur, he copped that 2-week suspension for the crusher tackle in the SG Ball Grand Final. And I'm pretty sure he would have come in for strong contention for this team as well this week. So it could have potentially been 6 players elevated. But as well as your takes on this, I'm wondering whether there was any consideration for Ethan Sanders to go directly up to New South Wales Cup.
Yeah, I think
that lacking the halfback.
I think that there would have been a conversation about that this week, 100%. But maybe they just want to see Ethan make that not slow but steady progression back through Flegg, which we saw him play very well in last year. Give him maybe a month of Flegg football and then reassess, put him up to Cup. Because, right now there is a huge need to put him up there to part in the ranking potentially, but they're being a little bit more measured in their steps there, which I can't fault. As much as I get excited about seeing young players accelerate through the development pathways, there is a duty of care too to make sure that they're not sort of running before they can walk properly. I suppose another player that we could have mentioned there, and I think he picked up a pretty nasty cork, if I'm not mistaken, out of the City vs Country game, was Blaze Talangi, who probably would have been in close selection contention as well for Jersey Flegg. So there's a whole lot of young players here that are going to make the competition for spots fierce in the coming games and weeks and rounds. So that's a good thing for the Jersey Flegg. And it's going to be hopefully a good thing for the New South Wales Cup as these young players, battle and compete, like the old adage of iron sharpening iron. All this competition for spots hopefully breeds some real strong competitive spirit and sort of opens up pathways for players to progress.
Clint, can you imagine Coach Craig Brennan's reaction now he's been there, he's waiting to get hold of the Jersey Flegg's half from last year, Ethan Sanders, if the first week that he could select him, he was told, now listen, Craig, he's actually needed for New South Wales Cup. So,
it certainly would have been a unique set of circumstances, or I guess it is a unique set of circumstances that leads to it even being a discussion point. But I think the club is playing it smart here. Given that Ethan's last game was the SG Ball Grand Final, it's a big shout to step up and go down to play an away game against Canberra in New South Wales Cup. I think John's hit the nail on the head. There'll probably be a few weeks in Flegg at the very least before he comes into consideration for Cup.
Yeah, I guess you have to, even though he had that experience last year in Jersey Flegg, it's still about finding your feet again, isn't it? It's the games are played at a different pace, and that's quite a rapid acceleration. If he was jumping from the pace of SG ball straight up to the pace of New South Wales Cup, it doesn't mean that he's won't come into consideration down the track. As a matter of fact, I reckon if the circumstances were similar, say in about round 18 or 19, I think I know what would be transpiring in the selection room. So now we'll wrap up the Eels news with the Indigenous jersey that the Eels have revealed, which will be worn in the match against the South Sydney Rabbitohs. It's another jersey designed by Aboriginal Indigenous artist Sean Kinchelli. He did a great job with previous NRL jerseys for the Eels. It's a jersey that acknowledges the Parramatta people and language. Just going off the Eels notice on their media release, says that it not only acknowledges the Parramatta people and language, it's the winding rivers, the mountains, the bushlands, and importantly, the wildlife across Darug country. So that's the spiel that we've seen. Boys, your takes on the jersey?
Yeah, Sean's knocked out of the park again. He's doing a really wonderful job of his stuff, and it's great to see the inclusivity of this really being embraced by not just the Parramatta Eels, but by all clubs now. I think the West Tigers have a really nice jersey this year too, which is a great turnabout for them after the debacle that was their Anzac jersey. So they got that one right, and yeah, the Indigenous culture is a big part of our game, and just really nice to see it being celebrated in the right ways.
Clint?
Even more so when you consider the Indigenous history that's tied to the club. You know, obviously Parramatta translating to the place where Eels lie. Indigenous heritage is built into the fabric of this club. So, it's a wonderful jersey, and it's a wonderful tribute to not only our club but the area itself and everything that makes Parramatta and Darug land truly unique.
Yeah, just the way that they have the boomerang with the Parramatta gull across that on the chest of the jersey, and the eels that are across the just below the sponsor name. The transitions through the jersey just look brilliant. And as you said there, 40, that Sean's just absolutely knocked this out of the park again. It's as far as jerseys goes, it's a work of art. It's an absolute work of art. I mean, we say he's an artist. Well, he's actually created a work of art. And the thing about these jerseys that Sean's designed over the last couple of years is, I think it's a shame that it's only worn once.
Yeah, I agree. Some of these jerseys deserve to have a month or so of being repped. Like they're beautiful, and the message is good. So, and also the other thing probably worth mentioning is that it's not a one-to-one, but that the silhouette of the Indigenous individual with the spear is in a way a throwback to, I think, Parramatta's original logo. So that's a nice little inclusion to the jersey too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, fellas, we've now got some news that's going across the NRL. Let's just first of all, a couple of magic round takes, and then we'll talk about some things that are making the news at the moment. But what did you make of Valynce Te Whare, who was made his debut for the Dolphins over the weekend?
They've already dubbed him Val Meninga, haven't they?
Yeah.
He's looks like he's an interesting prospect, almost in that sort of Conrad Hurrell mold. He's very thickly built, powerfully built. Takes a second or two to get the speed, but once he gets downhill, he's terrifying to stop. He's a still a relatively fresh-faced rugby league prospect, isn't he? Because he made that conversion from Union only recently. So he's been plying his trade in Q Cup up there, and yeah, had a fantastic. I mean, you talk about debuts. Remember bagging a double and getting the to do the haka for your family at an absolutely packed out Suncorp Stadium. Doesn't get much better. So really, really cool story for Magic Round, and Magic Round has actually been home to a few of those really cool stories. Our own Jake Arthur against the Warriors scoring the match-winning try. That was a really nice one there for us. And yeah, there's been more than a couple of those ones across the last few years. And Valynce is just the most recent in that line of stories.
Clint, if I was to get you to use the crystal ball and say, where do you think Valynce would be in, say, 3 or 4 years? Do you think there's going to be that continuation of the career? Is he a Magic Round flash in the pan, or do you think he's got a long NRL career ahead of him?
Well, he certainly made an impression on the weekend and in his debut. And, he's one of those players that has a high ceiling, but it's ultimately up to him.
Mm-hmm.
Is the best way to answer that question. We noted, I guess, similarities to someone like Conrad Hurrell, who has to date had a very up and down NRL career and rugby league career across the world. But for Valynce, it's a case of, all right, that game's happened. Now time to double down and continue working to try and be the best player that he can be. As I said, there's no shortage of ceiling for him, and he can achieve whatever he wants to achieve. But as the competition gets more used to, more accustomed to him, they're going to manage ways to try and I guess combat what he does. So it's going to be upon him to take the next step and overcome those challenges too. But look, I might just add to that, gents. A penny for the thoughts of Morgan Harper watching that game.
And I suppose that the other thing for Val is that you can't ask for much of a better mentor than Wayne Bennett to manage you through those rookie ebbs and flows that come with being not only just an NRL rookie, but making that transition from union to league. So he's going to have bad games. He's going to make mistakes. That's going to come with the territory. And I think one thing he needs to do is probably get a little bit more NRL conditioned still. But, he clearly can be a bit of a wrecking ball with that footy in hand, and that's always worth plenty in the code. So very, very exciting young player. Going to be interesting to see how much or how long he can maintain the rage before he might hit a bit of a wall.
Agreed.
The really big story that's come out of Magic Round has been the accusations of the Warriors, the CEO of the Warriors' major sponsor, which is One New Zealand. It's Jason Paris, who's the CEO, and he's basically accused the NRL referees of cheating. Like his comments have literally pointed the finger and said, you're cheating. And it was Todd Smith that really was the target of his rage from the weekend. Todd Smith's actually a referee that we've got quite a bit of time for here on the Cumberland Throw.
I feel like he's one of the few that isn't like part of any sort of the sort of system that's there in terms of the tip sheets and whatnot. Todd tends to call the game a bit cleaner, in my opinion.
Yeah, so what we're getting at there is that we believe that referees, in their preparation for matches, that what's been talked about as an unconscious bias that they might have towards the teams that are at the top of the table, or let's say favoured teams in terms of teams that they expect to perform well in a particular game, that there is, well, maybe it's, if they're using tip sheets, if they're doing all this preparation, I don't know if you could call it an unconscious bias, because I think if you're going in with any preconceived ideas about how a match is going to play out,
induced bias.
Yeah, yes, most definitely. If you go in, you believe certain players are going to tackle high, certain players are going to try to creep forward in the defence line, or will get a bit messy around the rucks or that sort of thing, that if that's all part of your prep, you're not necessarily going in to referee what happens in front of you. You're almost tuned in to look for things, and maybe you're going to miss some other things along the way. And I think that sometimes that plays out when we call out about not so much where decisions go against your team, and so in our case the Eels, because you can look at it at a call and you go, okay, that's fair enough.
Yeah.
But it's when it doesn't happen in return, when someone in the opposition does exactly the same thing and it's allowed to slide, or when the entire team from the opposition, if they're offside or they're slowing in the ruck or what have you, and you just go, but hang on, like, you've been blowing that up for one team, why aren't you blowing it up from the other? So that's where we're talking about that we're not happy when those sorts of things happen. But he's well and truly crossed the line, hasn't he, Jason Paris?
It's something that fans always talk about, and like you mentioned, Sixties, if you go over the footage and you look at where teams get penalised, you're going to say, I'd say it's like 99 point something % of the time the referee's going to get those calls right. But the problem then lies in when you see the opposition do the same thing and not get pinged, and that's where the frustrations boil over. In this game, I suppose the big one was probably the Sifa Kula sin bin in the 65th minute, where he got sin binned for that sort of, I say trendy, that sort of grab the collar and also get a little cheeky punch in sort of action that we're seeing in these brawls these days. And you fast forward to the South Sydney game where Latrell Mitchell gets away with doing pretty much the exact same thing to Harry Grant, and you see those sort of...
Well, actually, he did it twice to Grant, and then he did it once to... I'm trying to think who the other player was that was involved.
And that's where you start seeing, but the idea that double standards or different standards might be in place starts to creep in. And you think back to Parramatta and Darwin, where Payne Haas doesn't get sin binned in a game where he ends up getting a grade 2 dangerous contact charge. They're the incidents where it's not the referee with the live whistle, with the hot whistle that's making the hard call on the fly, because they're the ones that we give a lot of latitude for referees to make the mistakes, because as much as it sucks and you groan about it in the heat of the moment, you look back on it and you say, these guys are running 15 kilometres a game, calling these incredibly difficult margins of right or wrong decisions on the fly, and you're going to wear the odd bad one there. But when it's the bunker getting involved and not being consistent, that's when you start getting really frustrated. And while the CEO of One, whatever it is now these days, has definitely crossed the line, and now they're talking about some serious legal action to the referees union in response, you can understand why fans get very frustrated, especially for New Zealand, who, of all the teams that get kicked when they're down, I feel like the Warriors have been kicked while they're down a lot in the history of the NRL. Yeah.
Now, Clint, I know that you've got a lot of time for referees and how difficult their task is. I would imagine you strongly believe that this CEO's well and truly gone over the line.
There's two things that I want to say on this, gents. The first thing is Jason Paris in this instance was talking like a fan and not like a CEO. and in this in the context of this situation, he's a CEO of their major sponsor, and it's at the very least gross misjudgment from him to think that airing any of these types of grievances was appropriate in the manner in which he did. I expect there to be an apology and retraction, and I dare say some form of mediation that takes place between his company that he represents and the Referees Association. Secondly, as well, yeah, absolutely. The job of referees is incredibly difficult, but what these comments potentially do as well, gents, is it unfairly draws attention to something that's actually probably worth the discussion that we were just starting to have. And there is something to be said about calls going both ways. What this does is it creates an out for anyone who doesn't want to have those discussions now, when it's something that is worth having. The referees are human, but they're also not faultless. and we have a right as fans to demand excellence with the acknowledgement that some latitude is given due to the nature of the job and the role itself and the speed in which it happens. It's a real tough one for me to swallow this. I wasn't privy to it until probably yesterday afternoon. And, they're not the actions of a C-level executive and someone who holds a position like that. And, I fully expect there to be ramifications.
Yeah. And I think, and maybe this is something we can end up discussing on a future podcast, but when we're talking about referees preparing for games, referees are actually superb athletes these days. And I've watched them come and train at Parramatta, as they do with, I think they have that offer extended to all the clubs that they can come and referee opposed sessions, help out at training wherever possible, because it helps them with their physical preparation. There is nothing better for the referees' preparation for a match than refereeing the teams that they're involved with throughout the season in as close to match conditions as you can get through the week. Because, like, apart from that, what are they going to do? Are they going to look at videos? Now, this is where I'm not sure what goes on in terms of their level of preparation. There was something in the past where I think they would have the referees on like treadmills, and they have footage that plays for them, and they have to be making calls that, if they see something that happens. There was like a simulation of where they were able to track how the referee reacted as they were in various states of fatigue. But I just hope that preparation for them doesn't go too much into any sort of video analysis of the teams that are about to play. I would hope that the only video that happens is when they're reviewing what they've just refereed. And they highlight things that they should have picked up, that there isn't video of what's coming up. And that to me is a big thing. I think that's the difference between preparation for referees as opposed to preparation for players. Anyway, the other thing to come out of the Magic Round weekend was the extraordinary record of Wayne Bennett. 900 first grade games.
It's actually over 1,200 when you factor in the Brisbane Rugby League competition as well.
Yes. So from the time that he was assisting with Don Ferner down at the Canberra Raiders in 87, I think it was his first season down there, where they qualified for the grand final against Manly, he's just had this magic touch at the elite premiership level. But as you said, he had all those years of experience in the Brisbane competition, and but 900, like, could he go for another 4 years somehow? Could he get to 1,000?
Well, if the NRL is true about their promise on expansion to 20 teams, then is there a better man to helm the next one of the next expansion teams, one of the critical ones? So I imagine they'll be keeping tabs on him about potential expansion, maybe give him that one last hurrah. But yeah, geez, Wayne Bennett. I mean, I know that his time at Newcastle probably wasn't the greatest, but he's just brought success pretty much everywhere he's gone, and solidified, the Dragons, South Sydney, obviously Brisbane originally, and then now he's doing a fantastic job with the Dolphins. And there's a really big, I know that on 360 they were talking about, whether he should be inducted into the Immortals and what the Immortals means is the concept being whether it's players only or you can have other, extremely influential members of the rugby league game being inducted that way. But yeah, it really opens up the discussion on where Wayne now lies all time, because I know that in your case, Craig, because you were there for it, I wasn't around for the Parramatta Eels dominance and the breakthrough premierships, but Jack Gibson for the longest time has been hailed as the greatest and probably the most revolutionary coach so far ahead of his times. But geez, Wayne, for longevity and success, has to be right up there with Gibbo as one of the greatest of all time.
Yeah, I mean, I've obviously got a high regard for Jack Gibson because he's the one that dug the well from which the coaches nowadays are drinking from.
Exactly, and that's
to use
the pioneering work of Gibson really shouldn't be understated, and how far ahead of the times he was as a coach and understanding what it meant to manage a team. And in that regard, I think that keeps him up right at the top as well. But Wayne's longevity, I mean, you've got to tip your hat at it, because NRL coaching, it's a ruthless business. We always speak about it, how results-driven it is. And, you know, it's not like Wayne hasn't been a victim of it when he got kicked out of the Broncos and whatnot. But the man has always landed on his feet, always conducted himself as a coach. I mean, he's always had a very standoffish relationship with the media. Maybe that's why he's been so successful in the long term. He's kept at arm's length the entire time. But yeah, he's just one of the titans of his code. And there probably will never be another one like him.
Yeah, and what is it? 7 titles from 10 grand finals. I think Gibson was 5 titles from. He must have been about 7 grand finals, maybe something like that. I know because Gibson, he started his first grade coaching career back in the 60s, where he took the Roosters, who were wooden spooners in a particular year, and they might have been about 66 or 67, and I don't think they won a game when in the season they were wooden spooners, and he took them to finals football. He took the Newtown Jets in the early 70s to finals football. He obviously won the premiership double with the Roosters. He was 3 years with the Eels for 3 titles. I mean, 3 years for 3 titles. Yeah. It just, and of course he went on. He had a coaching stint at the Sharks. He never stayed. Where he's different, I think, to Wayne Bennett, where especially in Bennett's early years with the, and if you can call them early years now, but his extended stay at the Broncos from the time that they started, he was there for a very long time. Gibson was never one for spending a long time at a club. And maybe the latter years of Wayne Bennett are more reflective of Jack Gibson, in that he's there for a short time at a club, moves on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's certainly how I remember Jack Gibson. We were privy to that marvellous story from John Muggleton about which, I mean, we'd share it here, except for the fact
couldn't do it justice.
We couldn't do justice to it, and on top of that, that's a Muggo story. So that's best left for John Muggleton to tell the story of what happened to him with in that interaction with Jack Gibson. But we know he was a unique character. But Wayne Bennett, I mean, Clint, the players just speak so glowingly of him, not just for his relationships, but the way he communicates to them about what their role is out there on the field.
Yeah, well, to that point, he's a character in and of himself, and has a reputation that precedes itself. And the reason that you get to that type of status is for exactly all of those reasons. You know, you hold that status in the eye of the players because you meet their needs. He knows how to talk to them, and they feel comfortable talking to him. It's pretty fair to suggest that he's the ultimate relationship developer from a coaching perspective. You know, and if I was to put aside last year where Wayne sat out, Wayne has been a first grade coach every year of my life. He's been around that long. You know, not to suggest I'm 33 for the listeners that are out there and who care, but that's a long time to be in the game.
Yeah.
And to succeed, and at the level he has, it's going to be a sad day when he goes, because he's contributed so much to the game. And, if there is an opportunity to keep him going after the Dolphins, after his dalliance with the Dolphins, and maybe that presents itself in the form of a new expansion opportunity, well, I welcome it, because, Wayne Bennett is just one of those things that's been a constant in rugby league for my life. And, even though he's never been involved with our team or any of the teams that I follow. I speak, of course, from an origin perspective there. But you can make an argument for the Australian national side, but it's going to be sad the day that Wayne stops coaching.
Yeah, and the big thing for me,
I have this suspicion that he's never really going to leave coaching until he leaves this mortal coil.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, Greg. Like, honestly, it's so deeply ingrained into the core of his persona, isn't it? And the big thing for me with Wayne is that cutting edge, and I use the term not loosely, but cutting edge tactical coaches have come and gone. But the longevity of Wayne and of players, of coaches and players that he's been involved with and raised up, really reinforces the importance of being a good man or player manager as a head coach. And what it is to get your team up emotionally and psychologically consistently, and how valuable that is, and be able to be competitive with rosters that aren't always the best. I mean, the flip side's also true. He's had some of the most stacked rosters in history in Brisbane and whatnot, but he's taken lesser rosters like he has right now with the Dolphins, a roster that was largely decried and memed on at certain points, and made them highly competitive because he instills self-belief in his players and gets them to be competitive in collisions, physicality, chasing those 1%ers, all the things we talk about, all those rugby leagueisms that are rugby leagueisms for a good reason. Wayne has really perfected the art of getting value out of them.
Yeah, absolutely, and in setting them up in that first year like this, he's probably going to make it easier for them to recruit the sort of talent that they weren't able to attract in this first year. But I have to put my hand up. I was a person that believed that they were going to finish at the bottom of the table, and I am still waiting for them to falter. And I still haven't given up on that, but I'm feeling like an idiot every week with my calls about where how low they're going to finish this year. I'd like to segue into something that's somewhat related, and we'll keep it in the Queensland theme. Ben Ikin going from the role at the Broncos to heading up the QRL. What's your thoughts on that, John?
Well, that was the one. It's not happening. It's not happening. It's not happening. There's nothing here. Oh, it happened. It's one of those, worst kept rugby league secrets, isn't it? That Ben Ikin came in, made some splashes at the Broncos. Apparently didn't jive very well with the other long-time power brokers at the club, and they end up sort of compartmentalising him to game day stuff, I think, with the Broncos, and he's made the jump to QRL, and it's no surprise. So, he did a good job with what he was handed with Brisbane, and he's been a big part of the reason they've turned it around and are back to being sort of not perennial yet, but they certainly have the pieces to be a perennial premiership contender. And yeah, now he goes to QRL, and it's a bit frustrating because I think Ben's a fairly savvy operator, and we don't need Queensland getting any better when it comes to Origin.
No. Is this the ideal career trajectory, do you think, for Ben Ikin, Clint? Or, are we going to hear more from him now, or are we going to hear less from him? I didn't mind the job that he was doing in the media, to be honest. So in one respect, I was a bit disappointed that he moved on from his media work, but what's your thoughts about this? Does he go quietly into the background in such a role with the QRL?
Well, look, he's obviously a man of many talents to be considered for all these different roles, because they require a vast skill set. Some these positions are all while there's some crossover in the fact that it's involved in rugby league, there's fronting the media as an anchor is very different to being involved in a football program at a club, and now heading up the QRL. So, it's he's obviously a man of great talent, and he's obviously a man that's very well regarded, which two very important things in rugby league. And I might just add, gents, the Broncos are far too resource strong club to remain where they had been the last couple of years. And Ben was obviously a key part, or a contributing part at the very least, in course correcting for that club. And they're starting to bear some of that fruit now, and I dare say that will compound over the years to come. But look, I think it's an interesting move. Like you, Craig, I've come to quite enjoy Ben and his role in the media. But he obviously gets a level of satisfaction and fulfillment out of being involved in this side of rugby league, and he's along with Wally Lewis over the years, and certainly in his time when he was at Channel 9. He was a very, very vocal Queensland supporter throughout the Origin coverage, and couldn't imagine him too many better suited Queensland Origin people to be in the position that he's going to.
Yeah, I just wonder whether, from a career perspective, that he's goal orientated, that he enjoys tasks that are maybe set that he sets for himself. Likes to see achievements in where he takes an organisation, and maybe that media aspect of his career wasn't necessarily something where he could dig his teeth into in the same way. Now, let's get into the player, the story that just keeps on giving this year, which is around Joseph Suaali'i, because if it's not around his relationship with the Roosters, it's how the boss of the Australian Rugby Union is throwing stones at the NRL and getting his name in the papers for doing so. I'm not even going to use his name in this.
I don't even know.
I
legitimately can't remember his name. The only time I've ever seen it is when the big ego swinging matches happened with Rugby League Power Brokers. So that's the only way he's gotten into the press, is because Rugby League is letting him. Yeah,
well, I don't really want to be speaking about him so much here, but I'd like to focus on the Roosters and the talk around Suaali'i being released. Now, you've had Nick Politis come out and just said, look, it's not even up for discussion. It's not going to happen. He's going to see out his contract here. I think we've all been around rugby league long enough to know that it's probably has been discussed.
Well, Ben Ikin wasn't going to QRL. The Broncos were adamant, and then a couple months later, he's gone. I mean, unfortunately for rugby league, it's not always true, but largely when there is smoke, there is fire. These clubs, they just leak so easily when it comes to information. So when the journos get a lead, they're going to put it out there straight away. And in this case, I think there is smoke and there is fire.
Okay, so I'm going to get the two of you to make a call. Does Suaali'i see out his contract with the Roosters till the end of next season? John?
End of next year? I don't think so.
Okay, so what's your thought? What happens for him?
I think he'll probably play out the majority, if not all of this year, and then we'll transition to rugby a year early as the Wallabies look to build around him for that World Cup push. Much as I'd love to see him be a free agent in rugby league, because there's a certain club that was looking for an X-Factor player, which would have been a perfect fit for 1.5 seasons. The Roosters have been... One of the lines of communication we got today was the Roosters are adamant that if he were to be released, it would be strictly to rugby union, not to a rival rugby league club. So that's put the kibosh on my dreams there, because obviously the Eels have a strong connection to Suaali'i, courtesy of their young outside back at right centre.
Yeah, and we also know that with some of the bright prospects that are coming through from the junior pathways, that having a player of his calibre around for 18 months would probably have been an ideal time frame as well. Clint, what's your tip, mate? What's gonna unfold for Suaali'i?
Yeah, I see it very similarly to John and Craig, in that this noise will continue throughout the year, and there will be a mutual agreement reached between Joseph Suaali'i, his management, and the Roosters management, and they'll look to sever ties in the off season, and both teams will, inverted commas, cut their losses, and both parties move on with a handshake and a smile, acknowledgement. The door's open if you want to come back here, but you go do your thing, we'll go do our thing. will free up this money on the cap.
And for the Roosters, though, they're in a bit of a downward spiral right now. They're struggling on the field. Their star young playmaker is out of first grade, and again, they're telling you that he's not going anywhere, and Sam Walker's saying he's not going anywhere, but there's just enough smoke saying that he might be going somewhere. Brandon Smith, their marquee dummy half recruit, isn't. I mean, it's still very early into that contract, and he could turn it around, but he is not performing at dummy half the way they would have liked to. The Roosters have just been such a consistent juggernaut for so long, and they always landed on their feet. If they lost a player, the rare times they would lose a player, they'd go and get two players to replace him. And in this case,
found a bit of form when they played.
Well, Joseph's one great game this year, of course, came against Parramatta, naturally. So we're good for that, unfortunately.
Eels law.
It's very much, Quint. But, it just feels like the Roosters, they haven't got the answers this year. And as much as we're lamenting Parramatta's struggles, we're not the ones that had high-profile recruits that are flopping and have young guns that are really struggling with. Is it even second-year syndrome? Is it third-year syndrome? Like Walker played in the 2021 final series, didn't he, or 2021? So
correct.
Yeah.
So he's in his third season here. So and things aren't clicking for him. He can't play the game the way the Roosters want him to. So there are some real issues out of Bondi. And the Suaali'i one is just the one that's at the fore right now, bubbling away. And I expect things to get a lot worse as the like I said, all those egos keep checking each other across the code lines here, because the union CEO or chairman or whatever position he's got is really enjoying chirping here. And I think he accused the Roosters of having salary cap problems, I think, today. So he knows how to press some buttons. He's done a good job with Valynce and the Roosters here, and it'll be in everyone's best interest on the league side of things to just cop the blow across the face and move on.
Yeah,
I might add to this discussion, gents, that it's by no means an accident that Mitchell Pearce has also made himself known about the NRL.
That's the other thing that's popped up, hasn't
NRL
it?
club return for next year.
Look, my prediction on this is that as soon as you start to get Nick Politis putting his name out there with his comments in his attempts to shut it down, I'm pretty much on board with what you're saying. I think it gets settled for this year. He moves on early to rugby union next year, with the caveat that in Politis coming in and smoothing things over so that bridges aren't burnt going forward.
That's one thing Politis is very good at. Yeah, exactly.
They allow him to go early to his rugby union deal. They don't let it blow up this year. They keep all the relationships there. He goes off to rugby union. They want to keep it. They want to keep everything intact in terms of being able to have a future where if he comes back to rugby league, and I don't think there's any guarantees that someone like Suaali'i would come back to rugby league, but if he did come back to rugby league, that they don't rule themselves out via any bad blood that happens now. You've got that rugby union bloke going on about he's been treated horribly by the Roosters. Unless something's happening behind doors that's awful, I don't think there's been anything that's been untoward that's happened towards him. If he was suddenly playing reserve grade, or they started docking his pay, that might be being treated horribly. But I think he's had what? He's had two below par games. Big whoop. Like, hey, Roosters, welcome to the real world.
Mm-hmm.
We get players play below par. Let's face it, that's the lot for probably 80% of the NRL teams. They will have players that will go through rough periods. So anyway, well, fellas, I think we've just about got through it. We got through our Eels news. We got through our NRL news. Have we missed anything? I think we're up to date.
I think we've done a fair job covering the week that was for Parramatta in the NRL.
I might
Yeah,
just
sounds
add
good.
one thing that we did forget to mention. A big congratulations to Ryan Madison on his 150th NRL game this weekend. Go get him, champ.
Yeah, arguably been for the times that he's got onto the field, he's missed a few games this year, but he's probably been our consistent standout performer, certainly in the forwards at the very least. So, yeah, congratulations to Ryan Madison. And thank you to all our listeners for tuning in to the tip sheet. We will, as I said, we'll have lots of content coming our way, coming your way. Thanks again to our sponsors, Big Swing Golf at Northmead and Star Partners, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta, for making sure that we are able to bring this content to you every week of the year. And go you Eels.